I'm very happy to host this author event with Rebecca McKeehan to showcase her talent in writing. Stitch is a website created to wipe out loneliness and isolation for people over 50. It is in 88 countries around the world with large numbers of members in Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, and the United States. My name is Wendy, and I love hosting author events to encourage reading, book buying, writing, and to showcase the talent of extraordinary writers. I am proud to introduce Rebecca McKeehan, a member of Stitch and talented writer. Rebecca's journey as a writer started early as a child and has continued throughout her life. As a romance writer, published author, and member of Romance Writers of America, Rebecca has continued to flourish as a writer, sharing her talent with her devoted readers. Let's give a warm welcome to Rebecca.
Hi, Wendy. Hi, everybody.
Okay, so now we're going to start with your presentation.
Okay.
Okay. And you let me know when you want me to change the page.
Okay, you can change. Would help if I got my screen where it's supposed to be. I was born one dark and stormy June night. I guess you could say I was predestined to be a writer. Change. My writing career began inauspiciously in the 3rd grade when the teacher gave us a phone to ring. My writing career began inauspiciously in the 3rd grade when the teacher gave us an assignment to write a report. I don't recall whether it was she or I who chose the subject, but I remember it was about birds. The prospect of writing the report didn't worry me in the least. In the way of assumed immortality of kids, I was supremely confident in my ability to produce a reasonably acceptable paper, so I played on with Jimmy and Johnny, 2 brothers who were my very best friends. Change. The night before the paper was due was no different than any other school night. I came in from playing and never thought about washing up before taking my seat at the table for supper. Afterward, I took my bath and put on my pajamas. Then I retrieved a certain volume of our children's encyclopedia, chose an entry, and happily began plagiarizing it. I turned it in as my own creation the following morning. Change. 2 days later, the teacher stood before the class and began praising my excellent paper. She spoke effusively of everything from sentence structure to how well I had brought the subject to life before extolling it as being better than anything a more advanced student could have produced. And with every word, I sank lower in my seat as my shame grew. I will never know if she had intentionally employed reverse psychology, but the result was the same. Though she rewarded the paper a near perfect score and a big shiny gold star, I gained no satisfaction with my success, and I have never again knowingly stole from another writer's work, either wholly or in part. Change. Ironically, from that moment on, writing became an ever larger part of my life. In an effort to emulate my favorite authors, I experimented with writing poetry and prose in various genres and tried out different voices before settling on simply being myself. Eventually, I wrote my first novella, which I titled Iris, and entertained my 7th grade friends with it. I would write a chapter, then we'd meet on the beach where I would read what I'd written. Afterward, we'd discuss it, and that's where I learned the value of constructive criticism. If you can believe it, I still have that original handwritten manuscript nearly 50 years later. Change. I've had the good fortune of having had wonderfully supportive teachers and professors along the way. People who, unlike most of my friends, gave impersonal and subjective criticism, but who were never brutal. Their criticism was always couched in commentary about the strengths of what I had written and what I'd done that was especially well crafted. They taught me that I will never know everything there is to know about writing, and that I must never stop learning or growing as a writer. Over and over, it was emphasized that a good writer never rests on his or her laurels. To do so is to stagnate and, in the worst case scenario, become a parody of themselves. Change. I've always appreciated romantic relationships. Perhaps that is because I come from a long line of long marriages. There are many instances on both sides of my family of marriages lasting 40 or 50 years or more. Of course, not every marriage in my family tree was an ideal marriage, and there are instances throughout the generations where couples divorced and went their separate ways. But what the successful marriages had in common was commitment to one another and to their marriage, whether the marriage was based on love or convenience. If the marriage went bad in any way, most couples thumbed their noses at society's censors and did what needed to be done. Sometimes love never fades, even after the death of a spouse. My grandfather was quite young when my great-grandfather, Papa Johnny, died from pneumonia. My great-grandmother, Grace, eventually entered into marriage of convenience with a man needing a mother for his 4 daughters. They were married for many years, and a son was born of that union. No one knew the love she carried for Papa Johnny never lessened until after she passed. Then they found many, many photos of him in her things. She had been committed to her marriage of convenience, but her heart remained true to Papa Johnny to the day she died. Change. At one time, I was like most other aspiring romance writers with an eye toward publishing with Harlequin and Silhouette, which eventually merged with Harlequin. It was a fervent dream, but I struggled with actually completing a story of the required length. Then in 1994, I attended the Romantic Times Book Lovers Convention in Nashville, and my attitude and goals as a romance writer began to change. Prior to the convention, my approach to a career as a romance writer was a fairly typical one. I didn't bother with learning all I could about the publishing world, and I looked no further than Harlequin and Silhouette to present my efforts. There were many stories and poems I started but never finished. Nearly all eventually ended up in the circular filing cabinet, also known as the trash can. There was one, however, that I hung on to, and that was Love and Miss Annie. For some reason, I simply couldn't dispose of it. Unbeknownst to me at the time, it would become my first true step to becoming what, at heart, I already was, a writer who wrote romances. Change. My experiences at the convention have provided plenty of stories to regale friends and family with, including that moment when I had what every woman there would have killed for, and that was having the top cover model of that time, perhaps of all time, all to myself while everyone else was attending a luncheon given by a convention vendor. I turned around and there he was, not 10 feet away. Tall, gorgeous, built like a living god with long blonde hair and smiling right into my eyes. I think I managed to stammer something intelligent like, excuse me, before I dove for cover behind a huge potted plant. My friends later declared me a lost cause. But gorgeous male models and panic attacks aside, I had many opportunities to learn more about the craft of writing romances, as well as the realities of dealing with the publishing industry, and most of those teaching with successful authors happy and willing to show us the ropes. And while I might have been terrifyingly shy with gorgeous male models, I was definitely not shy in picking the brains of some of my very favorite authors. Change. On the third day of the convention, I introduced myself to Bill Cummings, owner of Charter Publishing, which published a popular magazine called Romantic Interludes, and took the opportunity to pitch Love and Miss Annie to him. I was rewarded with his business card and encouraged to send it to him at my earliest convenience. 10 days later, my story was in the mail, and 3 weeks after that, I received that coveted acceptance letter, along with my manuscript, now bleeding in red ink. It was the first time in my life that I have ever thrown an artistic fit. I couldn't believe he would have the audacity. I'm sorry, I'm new at this. I couldn't believe he would have the audacity to tell me what needed to be changed. This was my baby, my perfect child. But once my temper cooled, I accepted that if I wanted to be published, then I had to give him what he wanted and add some heat. And boy, did I. But Love and Miss Annie would prove to be kryptonite to the publishing world, beginning with Charter Publishing going under before they could publish it. In the next 18 months, 2 other magazines also accepted it, only to go under as well. I finally decided my little fairy tale was just too dangerous to let loose, so I buried it in my files to keep the industry safe for other writers and their stories, and there it remained for nearly 3 decades. Change. I continued to write, but things had changed, thanks in part to what I'd learned at the convention when the realities of working with publishing houses at that time At that time, when you signed a contract with certain publishers, like romance powerhouses Harlequin and Silhouette, you basically sold them the rights to your name, or more accurately, the name under which you wrote. Basically, if you left that publisher, they could keep your name and could theoretically have paid another writer to continue turning out books with your name on the cover. There is no way I was ever going to let that happen. So I said a final goodbye to my dreams of a writing career with Harlequin or Silhouette and headed off into unknown waters. Years passed and I continued to write, but life kept throwing distractions in my way, so there wasn't much of a noteworthy saving from the circular file cabinet. I would start stories, then set them aside for one reason or another. I wrote mostly poetry during that time, including a long story poem called Ramble's Folly. It would become the next milestone in my development as a writer. Ironically, it was written in very much the same way as Iris had been, meaning in quasi-serial form. But unlike those long ago days spent on a beach with my friends, I was writing the verses of Ramble's Folly during the long quiet hours as the lone operator on the midnight shift for an answering service. The owners generously made it possible for their employees to use their word processing program when we needed and then save our creation to our personal folders if we wanted. I never questioned how sacrosanct those files were. I simply continued to work, write, and save, work, write, and save as the weeks and months passed, blithely unaware that I had gained my first following. Then I was offered a job in Yellowstone National Park and turned in my 2-week notice. That's when the boss's secretary met me at the door and declared I wasn't going anywhere until they found out what happened to Helen and Todd. I obliged them by finishing the final verse just in time for my farewell party. My 2 years in Yellowstone offered a different kind of writing experience. My focus shifted to the awesome natural beauty of the entire Yellowstone ecosystem. Photography became just as important to my creative pursuits as my writing was. And when I look back, I realized that even when I was framing a shot, I was thinking in terms of poetry. Whereas another photographer might have taken an analytic approach to composing the scene, deciding on just the right f-stop, for instance, I saw only the earthy watercolor walls of the valley of the Yellowstone River, or the sun's glint on the waters of Lake Yellowstone. I tried to describe those images with film rather than with words. Mere snapshots would never do, and I had no interest in being artsy either. I wanted to capture nature at her most poetic, and in my opinion, you can't do that with the thousands of dollars worth of photographic paraphernalia if you don't first see her poetically, no matter how proficient you may be at the mechanics of the medium. 30 years later, when I look at those pictures and read my written odes to their subjects, I am once again part of the poetry that was Yellowstone as I relive every creak of a lodgepole pine in a breeze, every flash of sunlight off the water of a snow-flecked lake, every chuckle that challenged my ability to hold the camera steady as I watched a bison calf cavort around its mother, and every moment spent with the people I came to know and care for, some of whom I still call friends today. Change. After Yellowstone, I decided to return to college, so I enrolled at Northwest College in Powell, a small town about 20 miles north of Cody, Wyoming. There, after changing my major several times, I finally gave in and accepted that I would never be anything else but a writer, which meant English classes. There I met Dr. Kathleen Beakey, a woman who would become first the only academic advisor I have ever actually listened to, and later a kind of moral compass for my writing abilities, as well as someone I today count as a good friend and writing mentor. By the time I arrived at Northwest, I knew I was a good writer, but to me it was like having blue eyes. It was just a part of me, nothing all that special. I was simply one of many. But she, more than any other, made me begin to understand that with talent comes a kind of responsibility that you are given the choice to either accept or deny. You can either embrace it fully or you can continue to dabble. Without realizing it, I decided to embrace it. Understandably, I didn't write much more than academic papers during that time, but no matter what your reason for writing or what genre you choose, you have to master the basics. Now, I suppose I should be ashamed to admit it, but I know nothing about good writing. Nothing I can formulate into words that would tell you why I structure a sentence or paragraph a certain way. It's like learning to drive a car. In the beginning, you have to learn everything from the proper positions of the seat and rear view mirror, to how many times and how many places to look before you enter the highway, to how to navigate through all the traffic, and so on. Then you have to develop an understanding of the laws of driving, both the man-made and the natural. The reasons why you don't try to take a circular off-ramp from the interstate at the posted highway speed of 80 miles per hour instead of the posted exit speed of 45, for instance. And why that state trooper wrote you a ticket after having your car uprighted and towed away. With diligent study and practice and common sense, driving becomes almost rote. You do it without really thinking about it. Writing is much the same. You spend all those years in school learning the mechanics of writing, beginning with the actual formation of letters, learning which letters are vowels and which are consonants, and so on. Then came the rules of good writing, where you learn parts of speech and the different tenses and points of view. At first, you were mindful of each step you took, and if you weren't, I'm sure your teachers were only too happy to remind you with their dreaded red pens. But with time, the rules of good writing became a kind of template that would run like an app in the background, leaving you free to create without consciously worrying about whether that sentence should have had a comma somewhere or if an adverb was really necessary. Finding any broken rules came in the proofreading and editing stage, which, by the way, is the only thing that can turn writing from joy to job for me. It was during my time in college, change, by the way, it was during my time in college that a curious thing began to happen. While I was primarily a romance writer, I began to create crime dramas in my sleep. They were not mere dreams, fragmented and seemingly meaningless. They were fully fledged stories, complete with a beginning, middle, and end, a clear storyline, and a definite plot, and I knew they were good. The problem was, though they remained strong in my memory and imagination, I could not for the life of me get them from out of my mind to the keyboard where I could commit them to digital memory. They would only dance just out of reach, almost as if to mock me. I tried approaching the writing of these stories like I do many others, and that is to start out describing what I see or feel. In near desperation, I even tried to create outlines of them, even though writing from an outline has never worked for me. But they remained stubbornly elusive, and eventually I gave up and accepted them as a kind of personal drive-in movie. But it was frustrating to me as a writer not to be able to get them out in the real world where I could share them. Change. After Northwest, I returned home to Tennessee, in large part to help take care of my mother, whose health had begun to fail. For a while, I attended Maryville College, where, once again, I was an English major and where I became a member of the campus newsletter. There, I was given assignments that no one else seemed to find worth their time, but I nonetheless gave them every bit of the care others were giving to their more important stories. One of those assignments I was given was to address the issue of Maryville College students toilet papering the trees of their own campus during homecoming week. I turned it into an educational commentary about how and why one didn't toilet paper their campus, but rather the opponent's. The campus wasn't toilet papered that year for the first time in many, and to my understanding, it hasn't been since. As to the opposing schools, well, I'm told they didn't suffer a toilet paper shortage during the COVID pandemic. I had, for all intents and purposes, stopped submitting my work to publishers and magazines long before my time in Yellowstone. Getting published for the sake of getting published and whatever success that might bring had stopped being a motivation for me. I was writing for the sheer joy of it, because when I write, I am free in my own individual totality, and it was in that spirit that I loved to share my work. It wasn't for praise or recognition, although both are pretty nice when that happens. Instead, sharing my work was nothing less than sharing the essence of who I am. Change. In 2006, I discovered AuthorsDen.com, which describes itself as being the place where authors and readers come together. I joined first as a reader, which is free, and that gave me the opportunity to see what kinds of writing is welcome. In fact, I think every genre of poetry and prose, every conceivable subject in articles and essays, and every skill level are represented. It wasn't long before I became a paying member and was able to begin posting my own work, starting with my poetry, followed soon after by my short stories, and later by my articles and essays. Change. During those first couple of years, it was a rare occurrence for someone to leave a comment about something I'd posted. Then another poet named George Mateus, a true fixture on the Den, took an interest in my work. It was about that time of year when he was hosting his annual Halloween bash, where for the month of October, poets and writers within his vast circle indulged in a freewheeling celebration of Halloween. And like any good host at a party, he began to introduce me around. It was during this time that AuthorsDen.com conducted a Halloween writing contest, and I wrote The Old Lady in the Field just for it. From the start, the story flowed effortlessly from my fingers to the keyboard. It wasn't consciously creating it. More like I was downloading it in such a way it seemed the characters were writing themselves and I was just a conduit. I don't remember how long it took to transcribe it, but that's what it seemed I was doing, but it wasn't long, maybe 2 or 3 days. Then I submitted it to the contest, and on Halloween, it was awarded first place in the short story category. My trophy was an AuthorsDen.com tote containing an AuthorsDen.com mug and a supply of AuthorsDen.com ink pens. I treasured them all and still have the mug and tote. Change. At the height of the party, just before Halloween, a fellow poet named Denise Edwards posted, "Ladies, meet Wolf Devane," a poem about an egotistical, chauvinistic werewolf who believed himself a divine gift to women everywhere. Disgusted with the character, but not the poem, I knew he had to be taken down a few pegs, and knowing I was just the poet to do it, Night of the Wolf was written in short order. Thereafter, Mr. Wolf D. Bain, the divine gift to women, was last seen limping away, defeated the day after Halloween from the most intense, demanding, not to mention exhausting, sexual marathon he'd ever had, leaving behind his smugly satisfied should-have-been victim. The response was immediate and gratifying. Even Wolf's creator loved it, and I became a full member of the AuthorsDen.com world. Change. As the years continued to pass, my writing, as with most living things, grew and matured. I believe this is in no doubt due to my muse taking a much more direct approach to putting me to work. All creatives possess at least one muse. Most don't develop a relationship of sorts with theirs, however. They just respond to inspirations as they come without really thinking about where they came from. I was much the same, until it became a regular thing that something would awaken me at around 3 o'clock in the morning and nag me until I could write whatever I was feeling compelled to write. Sometimes there would be a strong picture in my mind, such as the house and gardens in Love and Miss Annie, or even a word that would get stuck in my mind like a musical earworm. I would start out describing what I saw, or I would use the word in a sentence. From there, the story would flow as if I was pulling on a string that led to a tapestry. It should have made my life easier, as it wasn't really like writing so much as downloading, but Muse is a hard taskmaster, and I was driven to write until I completed it. Sometimes that would go on for 24 hours or more. I became convinced long ago that my Muse must be male because he is such a pain in my butt. My apologies to any men watching this. But I wasn't stupid. I knew the value of what I had and showed my gratitude once by making him the hero in my short story as he's written. Now, whether Muse is a real entity or not to mention if I'm sane or not, the fact remains that I would not be able to write without him. I have never been able to write in the way that writing is often taught, that being to outline and rewrite some more, then edit, and edit even more. I cannot devote a certain time on the clock to begin or set a goal of writing so many pages or words before I quit for the day. If I try to do the things the accepted way, I fail miserably. So I stopped trying to follow all those rules long ago. Sometimes they're exactly what a writer needs to write, but sometimes you have to march to the beat of your own drummer. It's all a matter of what works best for you. Change. My romances eventually began to have within them a purpose in addition to the main character's romance. Short stories aren't meant for delving deeply, so I presented the issue in such a way that I hoped it would spark enough interest in the reader that they would want to know more. I also like to remember those who serve as first responders, as well as those who, like my father, grandfather, grandaunt, and uncles in times past, protect our freedom from those who would rob us of it. And as they say in the Marines, Semper Fi, change. Change. Throughout my writing career, there have been many people who supported and encouraged me. There were 4, however, who proved to be my staunchest supporters from the beginning. My grandaunt Wanda and my closest friends, Mary Jo, Nancy, and Ruth. Aunt Wanda and Mary Jo were in their 80s, Nancy in her 70s, and Ruth about my age in late 2021, when it suddenly occurred to me one day that time might be running out on my intentions to give them each a professionally bound compilation of my most popular short stories, as a way of showing my gratitude and love. Luckily, I knew how to do it without having to pay thousands to a vanity press, so I went to work. There are websites where one can hire professional freelancers for just about any purpose. I had already chosen a formatter and contacted him. We settled on his fee, and I emailed my manuscript to him. While he went to work on that, I continued my search for the right cover designer. I hadn't got far when a friend from my Yellowstone days, who has a gift for photography and graphic design, Brooke Holland Caxter, offered to see what she could come up with, as she had never designed a book cover before. So I said sure and sent her a copy of the manuscript. Not long after, she emailed me, asking if I had an idea of what I wanted, because she didn't know anything about romance. I chuckled and sent her a 2-sentence response. Brooke, you've been married for how long? You don't know anything about romance? I beg to differ. And she nailed it with the very first proof. At my first author meet and greet in the fall of 2022, there were many appreciative comments about the cover, though no one actually opened the book to see what was inside. And for all that, Brooke would not accept any payment. In the end, the entire cost of getting the book to print was less than $300, rather than the thousands a Vanity Press would have charged me. I was successful in presenting copies to 3 of the 4 women, as Aunt Wanda passed away a month before the book became available on Amazon. Her son, whom I've never met, contacted me to let me know of her passing, then went on to tell me how she had seemed to have saved every scrap of creative writing I had ever sent her. Since then, I've had the pleasure of getting to know a long lost cousin, and in the process, I've gained a new friend and fan. Since then, I've continued to write my romantic poetry and short stories, as well as the occasional article, and post them to my webpage. In addition, I'm responding to the encouragement of other writers to begin writing the crime dramas I dream so vividly. It is a new venture, almost in unexplored territory, and I admit a bit daunting. But I'm a writer who has always managed to rise to any writing challenge put before her. The stories I dream are already complete. All I have to do is basically transcribe them. Surely I can do that. Change. No doubt one day there will be another romantic collection available, though not as large as The Heart's Way was. A new book, this time a compilation of my nature-oriented poetry titled Naturally Speaking, will be available soon, also through Amazon. And later in the spring, my first children's book, Monroe the Wonder Dog, will become available as well. It tells the inspiring story of a paraplegic dog my cousin and I once fostered. It is my hope that in telling Monroe's story, children with their own challenges will be encouraged by the courageous spirit of a very special dog. Looking into the future, I am already considering where I want to go next in my journey. Becoming a member of Romance Writers of America is high on my list. It's to be my birthday gift to myself in June. I've already filled everything out. It's just a matter of getting the money. As for my writing, I may have ideas, but in the end, it will be my ever exasperating and pushing muse who likes to drag me out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, who will ultimately call the shots, and I will listen, because I learned long ago that he will never steer me wrong. Change. We should have rehearsed that a little bit more.
Pardon? Thank you so much, Rebecca. So does anybody have any questions for Rebecca?
May I say something, even though I'm invisible? It's Marcia.
Yes.
The way you presented that, displayed what a wonderful writer you are. The way you described how you created sentences, that it just flowed out of you. That whole presentation was that. It was wonderful to hear you. And I've already looked up your book on Amazon. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. I'll have another one when I get enough to make another book, but it's not going to be 600 pages long, I don't think. Not this time. When I first started the project, as I said, it was a labor of love for those 4 women who've been with me from the beginning. And that's all it was meant to be. It was just meant to be a gift. I had no intention of selling it or anything like that. But then as word got out that I had this project going, people started saying, "Oh, you've got to put this story in, or you've got to put that poem in." And I tried to accommodate everybody, but in the end, I had to draw the line somewhere. Um, so when I turned it over to the formatter, what I had was 300, I don't remember, 350 pages, something like that. When he was finished with it, it was 615 or something along that line. So I'll remember that. That was my first book, and first time I've had to put something together, and I didn't realize that it got longer with formatting. So so it was an interesting experience doing it that way, but I'm glad I did it that way. It gives you more creative control. Um, it's an all around really gratifying experience. And I had a great formatter. He actually wore many hats. He not only formatted, he also helped me with the editing. He uploaded it to Amazon, so I didn't have to try to figure out the technicalities of it. So um, it was going that route. I'm glad I did. I did check the vanity presses, um, mainly because I couldn't afford thousands of dollars, and then I came up with the idea to do it the way I did it. So it's a good way if you want to be published, if you want to be an indie like I am, um, and you really don't have an interest in going the traditional publishing route. It's a good option. It's a real good option.
Oh, I plan to self-publish.
Hmm.
I don't want to do the politics. I don't want to earn 10% of the
Hmm.
book's earnings.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I applaud you, actually.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Amazon's well, you've got that huge creative field that you could use. And if you go to the website I use to find my freelancers is Fiverr, Feverr.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
and you can find freelancers there for every known. I mean, they'll even write a poem for you if you like. Um, but I found my formatter there. As well, I was looking for the cover, the book cover designers. And the problem I ran into there was I contacted, I don't know, 4 or 5 of them, and they all gave me different images, but they all seemed to come from the same software. And I just wasn't finding what I was looking for. So then I was complaining to Brooke, and she said, "Well, let me try." And Brooke is absolutely one of the most gifted people I know as a photographer and as a graphic artist. And she does videos. I mean, everything visual. I think she does. So I was curious to see what she would come up with, even though this was her first bookmark or her book first book cover. And as I said, she nailed it with the first proof. I mean, the minute I saw it, she had it down, and she didn't charge me a dime for it. So she's also doing the
Perfect.
cover for my next book. She's also doing the
Awesome.
cover for my next book. So, and she won't let me pay for that either. She says it's for old time's sake.
Aw, that's so gracious.
So I'm repaying her by telling everybody her name so they can look her up. But she does have her own business. She does have her own business, by the way. She is, as I said, a professional photographer, graphic artist, videography. So she does have her own business. So you can look her up on the internet.
Thank you. I'll let somebody else have a turn.
Just on the business side of it, self-publishing, I understand about control and everything,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't get the promotion and stuff. Do you actually make any money, or is it just more for self-satisfaction of being published and getting a book out?
Okay, well let me first explain. I'm not in it for the money. Um, as many people have told me, I know I could be making money with my writing. I know that. Um, but that's not why I write. And if it does become an issue, if money does become an issue, then it ceases to be a joy and becomes a job. And I'm not willing to make that trade off. So what I do is I post to my webpage, and I get a huge amount of satisfaction from that. I've made a little bit of money off the book through Amazon. Um, but as I said, I'm not in it to make money. Um, and that's just, that's what sets me a little apart from most writers that I know. I'm not willing to sign a contract. I'm not willing to let somebody else tell me what to do and how to do it. And as an author friend of mine who is a successfully published Regency author, told me she wishes that she could do it my way, because she says many times she gets a manuscript back from an editor and it is not her manuscript. But because she's tied in with the contract, she has to go with what the editor says. So, it depends on what you want. I'm not willing to trade off my creativity um, to make somebody else some money. It's just not the way I work. So, if that's, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. That's not what I'm going to say. That's not what I'm trying to say. Many of the writers and poets that I interact with on Authors Den are published and make money from their writing. But I would caution anybody to understand that when you publish online, even in something like Authors Den, and you don't get paid for it, it's still considered published. So if you're going to enter a contest, that will count against you. When you publish on Authors Den, you hold all rights. You can do whatever you want with it. You just be aware that if there is a clause in whatever you're looking at, a contest or whatever, that the item has to be unpublished. And if it's online, it won't work. So that's something you need to be aware of. So anyway, but as I said, it's just my way of doing things. I have friends who make money with their writing that also publish on Authors Den. It's whatever works for you. It's what you want, what you hope to achieve. Your idea of success is totally different from mine. So probably. I have a very good friend. I had lost contact with him for several years, and on the subject of success, I had lost contact with him for several years. And when we reconnected a few months ago, he started listing all the things that he had accomplished in those years, everything from being just a short way away from having his PhD to owning his own business, working with young people with challenges. He had just come tremendously far and become successful in ways that I never could have imagined. Not that I couldn't have imagined it from him, but just a success like I couldn't have imagined for me is what I'm trying to say. And I made the comment to him at that point. I said, hearing you say all that makes me feel kind of like a failure. And he told me, he said, are you doing what you'd love to do? And I said, yes. He said, are you touching people the way you want to touch people? And I said, yes. He said, then you're a success. So I'm doing what I love to do, and I have achieved my idea of success. So that's my long answer to the question. But that's, it's whatever you find successful, and there's nothing wrong. There's no wrong or right answer. It's just what happens that works for you is what's right. So that's what I tell people. Just do what you think's right for you. Make up your mind what you want, what you hope to achieve, and go for it.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So you actually dream full plot?
Yes, I do. I do. I have one. The first one I ever had was when I was in college at Northwest, and I woke up and I thought, wow, I got to get this down. I started trying to make notes, couldn't do it. I tried to outline it, couldn't do it. Went to Kathy Beakey and told her about it. She said, you've got to write this. And now that was in 1999, I think. And just the other day, she was saying, would you stop talking about it and do it? So, but since then I've dreamt other things. They come up, they're like movies. They're beginning and end, with a plot, the whole thing. If I could ever get it out on the keyboard and get it into digital memory, I'll probably have a couple of bestsellers, and then I really will be a success in the eyes of everybody. But but so far I've not been able to get them out of my mind, and I can talk about them. I can tell you all about them, but I can't get them transcribed into written form or typewritten form. So it's very frustrating. It's very, very frustrating. And interestingly enough, I've never done that with romances. Romances don't pop up to me that way. I wonder if Muse is watching TV and that's what I'm picking up on. His TV habits.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Well, this is Marcia again. I'm compelled to bring this up. Since you can speak your dreams, can
Uh-huh.
you speak them into a recorder?
Yes, I can do that, and I have done that.
And
I
then
have done that because
can you transcribe or write from the recording?
I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't thought of that at all. Thank you. Um,
Thank you.
and I have a one of my friends on Authors Den. He's quadriplegic, and he does everything vocal. And he is probably not about that in particular, but at one point I was looking at surgery on my shoulder, and that would have kept me from typing for a
Sure.
while. And he had encouraged me to look into that software.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it never dawned on me to try it that way. I have to try that. Thank you. That's a great
No.
idea.
Oh, you are so welcome.
Kathy will be glad to hear it.
That would be a blessing to me that I could come up with something to help you. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm always open to suggestions, always.
It was,
As,
I
as
hope
they
you
taught
know
me,
it was said with great respect.
thank you. As I've been taught from early on, never stop learning. And that means
Right?
keeping yourself open.
Right.
But now I'm eager to start. I'm going to have to do this.
Oh, good.
If nothing else, maybe I can get my friend, the illustrator, to write a comic book. You never know.
No, you don't.
I think you were really blessed to have so much good encouragement with your writing when you were younger. I mean,
Hmm.
so easy to discourage, a young writer and, through criticism or something like that.
Yeah,
You were really blessed with that.
yeah. I have been very fortunate. And it's interesting, the friends that I talked about, seventh grade, when we would sit around and we would discuss Iris. Um, they had so much faith in me. I was a Navy brat. We were all Navy brats. And of course, when our fathers transferred, we went to the Four Winds and most of us lost touch. And many years later, when I ran into a couple of them, not maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we saw each other, and the very first thing they said to me, I mean, literally before they even said hi, was, "We've been looking for you on the bestsellers list. Why aren't you there?" These are friends who haven't seen me since seventh grade. That's how much faith they had in my writing, even
Oh,
then.
that's wonderful.
So, um, and I dug out that manuscript and I still do. And the first thing that strikes me when I pull it out is, man, my handwriting was bad. Um, but when I look at it and I read it, I mean, it's full of teenage angst and drama and melodrama and all that. It's definitely not publishable. But when I read it, and I think I was only 13 at the time I wrote this, and it's amazing. It's just truly amazing. And it makes me wonder if I had actually written that paper way back in third grade, how good would it have been? What if I'd not plagiarized and actually wrote the paper? I wonder how good it would have been.
It's amazing that you remember that so clearly. I can't remember any of the subjects of any of the papers I wrote in elementary school, and but I guess that being embarrassed is kind of, set it
Yeah.
for the mom.
Yeah, it was just a little embarrassing. And I really don't know if the teacher had to know that I didn't write that. She had to know. If I'm right, and she did know, she chose not to embarrass me. She chose a different way of getting a point across. And and she chose well for me. Another person might have taken that as a, hey, I'm successful, taking all the glory or whatever. Instead, it made me feel very ashamed. Um, so if I'm right, and she did know that that wasn't me, she did exactly the right thing. And in a strange sort of way, it did. It made me, from then on, I decided I'm going to write it from now on. I'm not going to plagiarize anymore, which is really good when you get older and law becomes a real problem. That I can remember because it was embarrassing. I can still remember, I can still see it in my mind. I can still see her standing up there just going on and on. I can hear her in my mind just as clear as a bell saying, that's better than any of the older students could have written. And I'm going,
Well, at least you were smart enough to know what to steal.
I knew to take it out of a children's encyclopedia. Or it could just be because I was enamored of those encyclopedias. I love those encyclopedias. So I think kids today miss out on things like that. I mean, when you have to go in and look for it and it's not right there in front of you, I don't know, it just takes some of the motivation away from me. I like seeing something to motivate me.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody have any questions about Author's Den? A lot of people don't know about Author's Den, and I stumbled on it. And as I said in my talk, I joined as a reader first, and it's free. It doesn't cost anything to be a reader. If you want to post, however, there's different levels that you can pay to be on. And so after I got my feel for it, I became a paying member, and I started posting things. And for a long time, nobody noticed. But I kept posting, and slowly I started getting comments. And then George Mateus came along. And that's really where it all began. And so it's like I'm not, well, I can't say I'm not even, I can't even say I'm famous, but I'm known. And since there are readers and writers from around the world, George, for instance, was from Sweden. I guess you could say I'm internationally known, but it's the following that I have there is more important to me than anything a professional critic could say. To me, critics are paid to give you nasty news. They're paid to tear you apart. And I think too many people abide by what those people, talking heads, whatever, have to say. The people that follow me on Author's Den, that read what I post, they are my true critics. They are the ones that I most want to impress. And it's interesting, if you go on and you look at things that I've posted, you'll see comments after each one. Most of them are good. Sometimes there's not many, sometimes there's none at all. Where I get the news is on the messaging. I have several. Ron Hull is a fellow writer, the quadriplegic I spoke about. he'll write something really good on the comments for that, and then he'll message me his true feelings. And what he'll usually start out is saying, "What I said is the truth, but," and then he'll start. I mean, he tells me everything, what I should have, the way I should have worded something, or the yeah, I left out, I made a typo or something like that, and I appreciate that, every bit of it. That helps me to be a better writer, especially when it's coming from another writer, especially someone as accomplished as he is. So it's a great place. It's a great place. It's kind of like, for some people, I guess it would be like actors working in a soap opera. It's a good place to learn your craft. It's a good way to get feedback. Um, and there is absolutely nothing to stroke your ego as much as when you pull something up and you've got a list over here of the category that story or that poem is in. And of course, mine's mostly romance. So over here's a category for, say, romantic short stories. And say I've got my short story, my latest one is my latest one is and I am drawing a complete blank on my latest short story. Um, Light of My Soul. I'll get it in a minute. Um, but I'll pull up, say, Light of My Soul, or Soul of My Light, or whatever it is. And over here on the corner, or on the side, there's the list. And I look at that list, and there is nothing as charging to your ego as seeing how many titles are yours on that list. And that's where I find my success. If there's a professional success, that's where I find it. I have had as many as it's a list of 20 titles. I have had as many as 16 on it at a time. So that, plus the messages that I receive, that tells me that I have a pretty decent following, and they wait for me. When I post something, I'm never off the list, and I'm not boasting here. I'm just saying that this is how I know I'm touching the people that I write for, and that's what I do. I write for them. I reach out to touch them. The seeing my name on the list and all of that. Yeah, that's pure ego. But mostly what I get out of it is knowing that I've touched people, knowing that my words have touched them in some way. And there is absolutely nothing that thrills me more than to get a message from a reader saying that something I wrote struck them in some specific way. Say I wrote one story where the heroine's daughter was paralyzed in a wheelchair, and I received a message from a mother who said she read that, and she was a single woman with a daughter in a wheelchair, and she said reading that story made her feel as if maybe someday she'll also find a love. Because apparently, and I assume a lot of people would know this, having a handicapped child, a challenged child in any way, kind of puts a damper on having a lot of relationships, meaningful relationships. So it made me feel good that I was able to give her that hope. So
do you start with a problem or a concept and build on that, or how do you pick a story and go about setting it up?
I have a confession to make. I don't. I tell people I am not the writer, I am the reader. I am a conduit. That's why I call it downloading. I do not plan my stories in advance. The crime dramas will be, although they didn't originate that way. The romances, Muse will wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'll have a picture in my mind, or I'll have a word in my mind, or something, some kind. It's like a thread. It really is like that thread that I spoke of, and I'll do whatever that thread is attached to. And say like with Loving Miss Annie, that started with a clear image in my mind of the house in the gardens. That's all I saw. So I sat down and I started describing that picture, and the story started flowing. It just flowed. I didn't plan it, nothing. It just flowed. And that's my writing. The only thing I've ever had to plan were my academic papers. Everything else, it just comes out. I'll go back sometimes and tweak it. You know, I'll reword it a little bit, but I never change the story. I never rearrange anything other than maybe a word here and there. Because I'm just a conduit. I'm just downloading. I don't even call myself the writer most of the time. I'm just a conduit.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I've always envied those who can write the traditional way. Um, I got a few D's and F's early on, because as I mentioned, I can't write from an outline. I have never been able to write from an outline. So what I ended up doing is I would cheat. I would write and then I would outline. And what I did wrong until I figured out what I was doing wrong is I would write the paper and then I would write the outline, but I was writing the outline verbatim. And that earned me some D's and F's. Then I learned to reword the outline. And then I started getting A's and B's again. But I have never been able to write from an outline as far as my creative writing is concerned. I just can't do it. I have to shoot from the hip, I guess you could say.
Well, we can't thank you enough, Rebecca, for coming and sharing your talent and your writing with us. And thank you everyone here in Stitch for coming to the event and celebrating the talent of Rebecca. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.